My mother had dreams of being a writer, and I used to see her type in the front room. The front room was also where I would go when I was sick, so I'd sit there and watch her. And clearly she was making a heroic effort, and the things would go off in brown envelopes to New York or Philadelphia even, which had the Post in those years. And they would come back, and so the notion of it being something that was worth trying and could indeed be done with a little postage and effort stuck in my head. But my real art interest, my real love was for visual art. And that was what I was better at, it was considered at first. My mother saw that I got drawing lessons, some painting lessons. I took what art the high school offered. I went to Harvard still thinking of myself as some kind of potential cartoonist. And I got on the Harvard Lampoon as a cartoonist, actually, not as a writer. But the writing maybe was more my cup of tea. There were some very gifted cartoonists over the Lampoon. You wouldn't expect to find too many at Harvard, but actually they were quite good, about 3 of them. And I saw that maybe there was a ceiling to my cartooning ability, but I didn't sense the same ceiling for the writing because I'd hardly given it a try. By the time I got out of Harvard, I think I was determined or pretty much resolved to becoming a writer if I could. I did write a lot of light verse and even some verse that wasn't too light. I don't think even I knew there was no living in being a poet. So fiction was the game. The writers I admired, a lot of them had written numerous essays like Robert Benchley, and I did do my share of those things when I was younger, sold a few of them. But I found when I attempted fiction, I took a few writing courses at Harvard, that, it's like a sort of a horse you don't know is there, but if you jump on the back, there is something under you that begins to move and gallop. And so it's clearly a wonderful imaginary world that you enter when you begin to write fiction. So I guess my hope was to become a fiction writer. I was prepared to fail. I was prepared to not be able to get things accepted because I saw that happen to my mother. I knew that not everybody who tried to write actually got published, that in fact that's kind of a long odds proposition. But I figured if maybe I'd give myself 5 years, and if I couldn't get into print in 5 years, I should know that I didn't have what it took. But as it turned out, I got into print pretty readily. I actually sold a few poems in my teens to marginal magazines. I remember one poem of the boy who makes the blackboard squeak, meaning the sort of naughty boy who makes the chalk squeak deliberately. But I was paid maybe $5 or $10 for it. But my hope was to get into the New Yorker magazine, which began to come into the house when I was about 11 or 12. The New Yorker was not a Berks County thing. There may have been a few subscribers, but the newsstands did not carry it because I used to look for it. But my aunt, who lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, and was kind of a hip lady, she was my father's sister. She thought that we, as a benighted provincial household, could use the New Yorker, and I, in fact, did use it. I loved it, read it, the cartoons, but then other things, too. The whole tone of the magazine was so superior to any other slick magazine. So I was aimed at the New Yorker, and my writing career really begins with the day in June of '54 when word came up. We were staying with my wife's parents in Vermont. Word came up that there was a letter from the New Yorker, and they'd taken a poem. And then a little later that summer, they took a story. So I felt, rightly or wrongly, kind of launched as a writer, a real writer. I was in Oxford the year after college with my then wife, who had been a Radcliffe girl, and she was at that point a pregnant Radcliffe girl, and so I had a little girl in April, and about that same time, Catherine White, who was the fiction editor and a woman of great power, one of the founding members really of the New Yorker in '25, and her more famous husband, E.B. White, came to visit us in our basement flat and indeed offered me a job. Or maybe she just told me I should see Sean the editor, when I got back to the States. And I did, and he offered me a job, and I worked in New York for about 2 years. That semester, I think I placed 4 or 5 more stories with them, as well as quite a number of light verse poems. Light verse was in its twilight, but I didn't know that, so I kept scribbling this stuff, and they kept running it for a while. So I was kind of establishing myself as a dependable contributor. And they were a paternalistic organization that tried to gather unto itself talented, whatever, writers. And it was funny to want to do that because really about the only slot they had to offer was to write for Talk of the Town, the front section. And we moved in, a little family of 3, into Riverside Drive, and I began to write these stories and discovered I could do it, and had kind of a good time doing it. You went around to New York and interviewed people or attended Coliseum show of kitchen appliances or whatever, and I was very good at making something out of almost nothing. But I thought after 2 years that maybe I'd gone as far as I could with the Talk of the Town as an art form. And I felt New York was kind of a natural place to live. I had 2 children at this point. My wife didn't have too many friends and I didn't think, very happy. Well, in the 50s, one didn't think too hard about whether or not your wife was happy, sad to say. But even I could see that. So I said, why don't we quit the job for a while? I thought they'd take me back if it didn't work out, and I'll try to freelance up in New England. So there's where we went. Moved to a small town in New England, and I never had to go back because I was able to support myself. The technology then was the U.S. mail, so everything took a day or 2 longer, but really it wasn't all that bad, and it was enough. It was good enough, and also you could get from north of Boston to New York in a few hours on the train. So I did used to go back and write a couple talk stories. It wasn't a clean break, but it was a break and a kind of a daring thing. But I felt that I would be better off in what I thought of as real America. That is, in New York, everything is stratified. The people I knew were other writers. And although it's not a major industry, it was enough of a local industry that everybody was watching everybody else, and I felt like I was being crowded in a way. Small town, you have good odds of being the only writer and people not really taking an interest in what you do. So you are on your own as a person, and that's how it worked out. I thought it was successful. And also the children were able to move out of that pressure cooker, and they went to the public schools, and there were many amenities. I've not ventured too far from what I could verify with my own eyes, although I've tried, of course, in keeping up product to stretch and get a little out of the American middle class. I've written books about Brazil and a novel located in Africa, in fact. But yes, basically it's true that my own life has been my chief window for life in America, beginning with my childhood and the conflicts, the struggles, the strains that I felt in my own family. It is odd. I loved mystery novels, and I've tried to write them. When I was in my teens, I began to write a mystery novel and tried to figure out how to plot it. You sort of plot it backwards, here's who did it, then you try to hide that, and I couldn't really do it. I'm not saying I couldn't do it if a gun was put to my head, but it felt unnatural and felt like a very minor kind of witnessing. In other words, I was willing to be entertained by others, but I didn't want to write entertainments myself. I wanted to write books that told everything I knew, that were as fully about life in my tame band of it as could be said. So yeah, quite early I began to try to become a serious writer. And as you say, it's a little puzzling. I have written some science fiction, though. That may not be well known, but a couple of my novels are located in a hypothetical future. And there is something about that it frees you up a way. Your attempt is always to, yes, write about the world you know, but also to somehow get out of it, if only by a little jump or a trick or something must be different so that your imagination is really engaged. You're not just spilling your life, but that you're to some extent inventing another life. in a democracy and in the 20th and now the 21st century, if you can't base your fiction upon ordinary people and the conflicts which, or the struggles, whatever the issues that engage ordinary people, then you're reduced to writing about spectacular, unreal people, James Bond or some fabulously rich that some female writers write about, and you cook up adventures. And the trick about fiction, as I see it, is to make an unadventurous circumstance seem adventurous, to make it excite the reader, either with its truth or with the fact that there's always a little more than goes on. I mean, there's multiple levels of reality. As we walk through even a boring day, we see an awful lot and feel an awful lot, and to try to say some of that seems more worthy than cooking up thrillers. D.H. Lawrence talks about purpose of a novel being to extend the reader's sympathy, and it is true that upper middle class women can read happily about thugs, about coal miners, about lowlife, and to some extent they become better people for it because they are entering into these lives that they have never lived and wouldn't want to lead. But nevertheless, it is, I think, this sense of the possibilities within life, the range of ways to live that in part explains the novel's value. I mean, in this day and age, so late really in the life of the genre, why do some of us keep writing them and some of us keep reading them? And I think it is in part because of that it makes you more human. It's like meeting people, at a cocktail party that you had never met and wouldn't have cared to meet. You wouldn't have gone out of your way to meet, but suddenly they become real to you. You understand to some extent. There is a certain amount of being honest and really trying to be honest about what it's like to be an American male of your age and with your general outlook. So yes, it is a path of self-understanding. But the fiction that I'm proudest of, insofar as one can discriminate, is that where I have made some leap. I'm best known and been most rewarded, really, prize-wise, praise-wise, for the Rabbit books. And Rabbit he and I share roughly the same age and we're born in the same place, but I've long left Berks County. He stayed there. And it's a kind of me that I'm not. I never was a basketball star. I wasn't handsome the way he is, and nor did I have to undergo the temptations of being an early success that way. So that for me it was a bit of a stretch. Not an immense stretch to imagine what it's like to be Rabbit, but enough of one that it was entertaining for me to write about him, and maybe some of that self-entertainment got into the book. In other words, I can kind of walk around Rabbit. In a way, it's hard to walk around, say, the autobiographical hero of some of your short stories, where it's your twin, and you're attached. And it's the idea of breaking that attachment, I think, that matters, and where the fiction really begins to take off, when you can get somebody else in your sights. Yeah, I didn't write that with any idea of a sequel. But the book does kind of end on a hovering note, and people asked me, well, what happened? And enough asked me, not too many, but a few, put a bee in my bonnet, that when I had run out of subjects, I thought, well, why not tell what happened and bring Rabbit back? This was during the late 60s when there was a lot of turmoil in America, and so I brought him back this time as kind of an everyman who was witnessing the pageant of protest and disturbance, distress, drug use, everything. Almost everything was in that book, including the moonshot. In fact, the moonshot's kind of a central event in it, so that the Rabbit who came back the second time was a much more purposefully representative American than my initial Rabbit. He was just a high school athlete who had nowhere much to go after after he graduated, whereas the second Rabbit is kind of a growing man, trying to learn in a way. And I've always seen Rabbit, and indeed Americans as general, as learners, as willing to learn. They may be slow to learn, but there is an openness to our mindset that I think enables us to overcome our mistakes or our prejudices and move forward. Certainly the world now is so much more open. I mean, it's easy to be sentimental about the 30s and 40s and the wartime solidarity and all that, but there was so much racism, sexism, everything. It was a brutal world compared to the one we're trying to make now. I found that it's the present tense, which I began to write Rabbit Run in, was a great liberator. Somehow, I loved writing in the present tense, and it's become a bit of a cliche now among younger writers, but at the time it was a bit of a novelty, and certainly a novelty to me, and there's a kind of a level of speed you can get going without the past tense that was suitable to Rabbit and also suitable to me as a writer, because the books wrote themselves fairly easily. I say that now, I'm not sure it was always easy, but basically the present tense plus the combination that this was a landscape that was in my bones, this rural Pennsylvania, semi-rural, metropolitan actually, but anyway, I always felt at home writing about him and didn't have much trouble having things for him to do and for the other characters to interact. So I was happy to return the first time, and then having returned for Rabbit Redux, it seemed obligatory on my part to write at least two more. More than four, I thought would be milking it unduly, that people are mortal. That's one of the things about them that a fiction writer should be aware of, and so I thought even though he was relatively young that I should kill him off while I was still writing well. Suppose I get sick and then you're left all without a rabbit wrapped up. Rabbit Wrapped Up, not the bad title. So at any rate, I did that, and then since I was alive, it turned out 10 years later, I wrote the sort of novella about the two children finding each other and remembering sort of their father, and him kind of haunting the book. I wanted him to be there as a ghost, kind of felt as a ghost. It was hard for me. Also, because he'd been so good to me. I mean, the books won prizes, and as I say, they were fairly easy to write, but so it was a step. But at the time I wrote Rabbit at Rest, I thought the time had come to put him to rest. That it's not as if I was a writer who could only write about this guy. I'd had a good long run of it, and time to let go. In a way, it was almost corny to take him back to another street game, because you'd first see him in Rabbit Run and joining some kids around the telephone pole playing basketball. But, that said, it felt good to me, that whole thing. I went down to Florida, did some research, walked around Fort Myers, tried to get a feel for a Florida city, and it was fun to do the research and fun to try to write those scenes. You do get very wrapped up in these characters and care about them. You don't want to get sentimental about them, but yes. And the doctor he sees who tells him he must find something to do. That Rabbit's trouble is that he hasn't really had enough to do since he stopped playing basketball. His wonderful companion in these books was Janice, his wife, and Nelson, his son, and they were the principals in the first novel, and you have the pleasure not only of seeing Rabbit age, but of trying to turn Nelson from an infant into a man, and a man with a grudge, and yet a man with certain qualities, but a destructive capability that Harry can't match in the end, because Harry was destructive when young, but he's become kind of a sweet old geezer toward the end. Well, he feels old to himself, and of course he is overweight, and he is kind of among the retirees down there. And if you'll remember, he's banished for some more sexual misbehavior, so he's kind of alone. Yeah, it doesn't feel too wanted in the world. My mother's parents had the house, and my father had the earning ability, such as it was, so they combined forces. About the time I was born in 32, it was the Depression, and my grandfather had been a man of some means. He had retired from farming, bought some securities, and then the securities let him down. And so I was born into a fairly dire situation, and I think one of the reasons that I never had any siblings was that it was economically pinched. And my father didn't feel entitled to invite any more people into the world. But for the one that did get through, me, it was kind of bliss, actually. I had all this adult attention, and whatever adult energy was there was focused on me, and my grandparents were they were old country folk, would speak Pennsylvania Dutch between themselves, although my grandfather spoke a rather elegant English. Yeah, they moderated the effect of my parents. So instead of an Oedipal triangle, I had a kind of pentagon, which is in a way better. So it was nice. My mother had a degree. She was unusual in that generation in that she had a master's degree, had got one at Cornell, and was hoping to become a writer or something artistic, but instead she took a job selling drapes in the local department store, and then she did that for a couple of years. I remember the department store with your mother behind the drapes counter is kind of a romantic place. I mean, there's all these goods and the smells of a department store for a child, and escalators, which were a novelty then. But she then, when my father got a job teaching, she became a housewife and stayed a housewife. It was nice. I can't complain. It was a fairly crowded neighborhood, so there were lots of other children, mostly girls, as it turned out, so that I really only had one boy, a playmate. But the town itself was small and compact, the kind of town you can ride from one end to the other on a bike without too much danger or pumping. Shillington, Pennsylvania, that's the place in which it was a suburb of Reading, which is the metropolis, and kind of a beautiful city, actually, Reading. A lot of people have not been there, and I don't urge you to go, but it's kind of wonderful. It has a pagoda on a mountain. It's Mount Penn, and there's a pagoda built by some eccentric playboy in the 20s, and so it has its scenic delights. And I always loved Reading, and when I came to write Rabbit Run, I had the quiet joy of trying to imagine what it would be like to be in Reading. So yeah, this was my horizon. Reading and Shillington first, Reading on halfway to the horizon, and on the extreme horizon, Philadelphia, where we went maybe 2-3 times a year. I think any move annoys a child a great deal. All a child asks is that the world holds still while he or she grows up, and many of us don't get that wish. I was happy in Shillington, and I was a school teacher's son. I had a slight presence. I wasn't especially popular or athletic or anything, but I was smart, as they used to say, and so it was fine in Shillington, and I kind of knew the ropes, but my mother wanted to get back to the soil and back to her own roots, which were at this farm. It wasn't the most traumatic thing, like moving to Los Angeles when you're living in the Bronx. That would be traumatic, but no, I continued to go to the same school with my father. I became a commuter. He and I became joint commuters, and in a way I saw a lot more of my father than most American boys do, so that was good. He and I went back and forth together, had adventures. I've written about this in a number of places, but a novel called The Centaur is my main monument to those days with my father, struggling for the dollar, and cars that keep breaking down, snowstorms that keep coming under your wheels. But it was beautiful because I saw what it was like to be an American man. I saw that it's a struggle. Not easy to be an American man. I was an only child, after all, and only children tend to read. And my mother was a keen reader. My grandfather was a Bible and newspaper reader, so I saw a lot of reading around me. And It's a world a child can control. There were things called big little books then, which were essentially bound comic strips, one panel and opposite a page of text, and it was an easy way to read. So I read a lot of those, and then I graduated to mystery novels, some science fiction. I loved Agatha Christie, of course, and also an American team called Ellery Queen. I wrote a lot of Ellery Queen. Earl Stanley Gardner. I must have read 40 books by Earl Stanley Gardner before I was 15 or so. So I got the reading habit, and I slightly branched out, I challenged myself. I remember at the age of 15 going into the library and pulling down The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot and reading it because I'd heard that this was a modern masterpiece. So it was random reading, but maybe that's the best kind in a way. It's not forced on you. And you get these glimpses now and then of the wonderful world of books. In Reading, there was a lovely Carnegie endowed library with walls of books. And I remember I read through a whole shelf of P.G. Wodehouse. Again, my taste was to humor, I think, and it's odd that I didn't become a humorist, really, although there's some humor perhaps in my work. But my first ambition as a writer was to become a humorous writer, to be like Thurber and Benchley and the lighter E.B. White, to make people laugh. I thought that was a harmless thing to do, thing that society never could have too much of laughter. Anyway, I did a lot of reading. I remember I used to lie on this old sofa with a box of raisins, and I would read as many as 2 books in one afternoon and eat maybe, I hope not the whole box, but a fair amount of the box of raisins. So that was my diet for a while. As a teacher's son, they were friendly to me, and I had a better understanding of teachers. They weren't the enemy, as they were for so many children. And I remember one English teacher in the 8th grade, Florence Schrack, whose husband also taught at the high school, I thought what she said made sense, and she parsed sentences on the blackboard and gave me, I'd like to think, some sense of English grammar, that there is a grammar, that those commas serve a purpose, and that a sentence has a logic, that you can break it down. And I've tried not to forget those lessons, and to treat the English language with respect as a kind of intricate tool. He taught junior high math and first-year algebra, and I sat in his classes for 3 years, which is a long time to be a student of your father, but luckily I was good enough at math, and he was sort of relaxed about having his son in the class. He wasn't harder on me or kinder to me than he was to the others, so it was good. Good to see your father at work, too, in a way, isn't it? A lot of kids never know what their father does, can't understand it. It's sort of something mysterious that happens in an office in a skyscraper. I remember going over a little ritual was I would go over when I was maybe in the 6th or 7th or 8th grade and help him lay out the tablets. First day of school, the Tuesday after Labor Day, the kids would arrive and find the tablets and the pencils, and somehow that little sort of ceremony. I remember it was very precious, but I never wanted to be a teacher, and I've spent some energy trying to avoid teaching, as a matter of fact. It was hard. Harvard asked me to do the creative writing course one summer, and I did it, and there were some good students, and there were some students who didn't show up, and there were some indifferent students. It was 15 in all. But I found that the effect upon me was not good, because these things didn't seem that much worse than stuff I was writing at the same time. I mean, and this effort of this is approaching a piece of fiction as though there's something slightly wrong with it that can be fixed, is maybe not the Gestalt approach that a real writer ought to have. So this sort of wanting to lift it up to one more level of readability or interest, all that. Some men and women can do it. Joyce Carol Oates seems to thrive on teaching, but for me it just made the precariousness of what I was doing all the more evident to me. Now and then it crops up, but maybe because the people I talk to are more kindly now and respectful, and so I don't stutter. Stuttering is a kind of, I suppose it shows basic fright, like in the comic strips, when people begin to stutter, it's because they're afraid. And also a feeling that my father thought that I had too many words to get out all at once. So I didn't speak very pleasingly, but I never stopped speaking or trying to communicate this way. And I think the stuttering has gotten better over the years. I found having a microphone is a great help because you don't have to force your voice out of your throat. Just a little noise will work. But it was real enough. One of the things, you write in part because you don't talk very well, and maybe one of the reasons that I was determined to write was that I wasn't an orator, unlike my mother and my grandfather, who both spoke beautifully and spoke all the time. I think maybe I grew up with too many voices around me, as a matter of fact. Since I've gone to some trouble not to teach and not to have any other employment, I have no reason not to go to my desk after breakfast and work there until lunch. So I work 3-4 hours in the morning. And it's not all covering blank paper with beautiful phrases. It's you begin by answering a letter or two. There's a lot of junk in your life as a writer, and most people have junk in their lives. But I try to give about 3 hours to the project at hand and to move it along. There's a danger if you don't move it along steadily that you'll kind of forget what it's about. So you must keep in touch with it, I figure. So once embarked, yes, I do try to stick to a schedule. I've been maintaining this schedule often, well, really since I moved up to Ipswich in '57. It's a long time to be doing one thing. Yeah, I don't know how to retire. I don't know how to get off the horse, though. I still like to do it. I still love books coming out. I love the smell of glue and the shiny look of the jacket and the type, and to see your own scribbles turned into more or less impeccable type is still a great thrill for me. So I will probably persevere a little longer, but I do think maybe the time has come for me to be a little less compulsive, maybe abandon the book a year technique, which has been basically the way I've operated. This present novel that will be out, The Villages, I several times thought it might be a bad idea and kind of abandoned it. So it was really the habit of writing that kept me at it. In the end, it was like a bad marriage. I mean, whatever, this is the wife I'm married to here, and I'm going to finish this book. Finishing it becomes the only way to get rid of it. So yes, it's good to have a certain doggedness to your technique. In college, I was struck by the fact that Bernard Shaw, who became a playwright only after writing 5 novels, would sit in the British Museum, the reading room, and his quota was something like maybe 5 pages a day. But when he got to the last word on the last page, whether it was the middle of a sentence, he would stop. And so this notion that when you have a quota, whether it's 2 pages or 3 is how I think of it, 3 pages, that it's a fairly modest quota, but nevertheless, if you do it, really do it, the stuff will accumulate. It brought back to me the life I was living at the time and the various real people who lurk behind some of the characters. So it was a trip down memory lane for me. The only novelty really in the book was that I rearranged them thematically so that a kind of smuggled autobiography flows beneath the full run of the stories. I suppose a stronger writer or a more self-critical one might have made a selection, but I thought somehow the value of the book might be in doing them all, doing all the ones that were good enough to get into print. Most of them in the New Yorker, a few the New Yorker turned down, but I thought this standard was enough that for a writer to become terribly judgmental about his work. Some of the stories could stand a little improvement, which I was happy to bestow. And so for me, it was an exercise in rewriting to some extent. I'm glad I did it. I came out to, it's sort of one of the books that's kind of a little too heavy to read with comfort, and I'm sorry about that. It's a heavy book, but there's some kind of statement. It's some kind of a new focus is being applied to these old stories just from the way they're arranged. I've rewritten the early books to some extent. Rabbit Run had some legal troubles. It was considered racy at the time, and so some sexually explicit bits were taken out, and they were later restored. So I was happy I put them back because the climate suddenly became, what's the fuss? And then again, I've looked at them. I reread the whole bunch when they were put into an Everyman 4-volume. So there has been some rewriting. There's a danger of an older man rewriting a younger man, though. You might just throw out the baby with the bathwater somehow. And I didn't rewrite. I wasn't looking for trouble with the early short stories. But when you're young, I think you're so surprised to find yourself writing at all that you jump on almost any word that will work. And when you're older, you sort of know there are lots of words that you could use, and so your writing becomes a little less inspired and a little more plodding and careful. But I did marvel at some of the phrases that the younger Updike tossed off. I mean, I thought, I couldn't do this now, I said to myself. So I'm glad I did it when I could do it. I was bringing a kind of verbal care, a verbal elegance even that they wouldn't otherwise get. So in a way I felt I had a franchise to maintain, and maybe the writing is too self-cherishing in spots, but the saying that you should write invisibly, that writing should be invisible. I think people know they're reading a book and that this object in front of them is a page of words. So I've always felt, no, what I really like in a book is the sense that the writing is itself entertaining or interesting, or makes you want to read a sentence twice. That kind of thing I like in other authors and tend to do it myself. I think I try harder to visualize the physical setting, the room, the dress, the face. Not sure I always succeed. And there's a way in which you can suffocate an image under words by putting too many. You can handle, say, a pale young lady with arched eyebrows, but once you start going into the eyebrows hair by hair and do the earrings on top of it, you get sort of no image. You get no image. So you have to watch this tendency to over-specify. But I think it is good to, Conrad spoke about helping the reader, making the reader see. He italicized the word, and I think there is that in my writing, a belief that seeing is not quite all, but seeing is a lot of it. And so I hope to see it in my own mind and then to transfer it to the reader's mind as best I can. But, readers are different. They all have different experiences. The word bed means one thing to you, another thing to me. So in a way, you were never read exactly the way that you would have read yourself. But nevertheless, we're all in the same rough human ballpark here, and I think communication can occur. I didn't set out to become a reviewer much, but I was a New Yorker writer and looking for any way in which I could appear in the magazine and sell, and I began to drift into reviewing in about 1960. Not very many at first. They had other reviewers, but as they died off, I became for a while almost the main reviewer. I did more reviews than anybody else, and you could say I was doing too many. I did try to avoid American contemporaries, many of whom, as you say, I knew, because who knows where envy or friendship enter in and distort the honesty of the book report. So I tried to review foreign or dead or Latin American, European or Latin American writers. There was a lot of ferment then, magic realism. The novel in Europe was much more overtly experimental than I'm aware of its being now. So I thought there were things I could learn just as a reader from reading these books. So I tried to read books that would further my own education, as well as earn me the money of the book review and keep me up. It's very easy to, when you've written for those 3 or 4 hours, your appetite for words is rather diminished, so it's all too easy to not read much. So the reviews did keep me reading and acquainted with trends in what do we do with this old dinosaur of the novel? And what new can we? Because the novel is a very capacious plastic. It's sort of what you make it, and it's taken many forms. Ulysses is, you can't repeat that, but that is an example of a novel that really tried to do everything. So we postmoderns are faced with this notion that maybe we're not taking it far enough. We're accepting the old conventions, quote marks, and he said, she said, and when we've had these experimental writers who've done so much. So anyway, it's good in a way to make yourself think about these basic issues. Why are you doing this at all? What are you bringing to it that's different? Are you just feeding the machine, or are you in some way altering the machine? All these things are probably, up to a point, useful. But in the end, you're left with your own intuitions and your own sense of whatever, beauty or meaning or urgency. There are a number of contemporary writers whose work I used to try to keep up with faithfully. Ann Tyler was one when she was younger, before she became a bestseller, but I thought she was really quite a magical writer and a very sweet-natured novelist, no gripes, just trying to show you, again, sort of what I try to do, to show ordinary life as having being worth writing about. Philip Roth is, of course, a marvelous writer and a great liberator, in a way, of what could be said. I have fallen behind after reviewing and admiring his earlier work a great deal. Muriel Spark and Myris Murdoch were English writers that I tried to keep up with. I'm trying to think of what I'm reading now, and all I get is some proofs of my own book. But I know there have been some. I recently reviewed a book called The Master by an Irish writer called Colm Toibin. Very interesting in the attempt. It was, but for me it was. It was static in a strange way. But anyway, it was an honorable attempt to write a novel that had never been written before. I don't think Henry James has been the hero of too many novels. So that, also there are a lot of classics that I would do well to reread or else to read for the first time. I recently read Vanity Fair after long last. Here I am, 70-odd years old, and I never read Vanity Fair. So that, in a way, is the most enjoyable when you put yourself to school with an old classic. I read a fair amount of Conrad, and there's still some left that I never got around to, but he's a wonderful, amazing that he did all this in his second language, or maybe his third language even. But he had the ability to make the novel seem serious. At the same time, he had this backlog of exotic ports and sailing, being a shipmaster, so he had a lot of middlebrow experience, plus this highbrow approach to what writing was all about that makes for a very tonic kind of fiction, I think. You hesitate to give advice to young writers because there's a limit to what you can say. It's not exactly like being a musician or even an artist where there's a set number of skills that have to be mastered. I marvel at musicians, by the way, that people can play the piano or the violin with that speed and that accuracy. Obviously, they need a lot of training. I'm not sure sometimes writers need no training, and some of the amateur ones who just jump in do better than the ones who had the PhD in creative writing. Colleges are very willing now to teach you, to give you a whole course of creative writing courses. Although I took some when I was a student, I'm a little skeptical about the value. I think what maybe young writers have lost is the sense of writing as a trade. When I was young, it was still a trade. There was enough magazines, middlebrow magazines, general interest so-called magazines. They ran fiction, but also articles, and you felt that there was some appetite out there for this sort of fiction, stories. Now I don't think that the academic publications, although they run fiction, have quite replaced this sense. Fiction is in danger of becoming a kind of poetry. that only other poets read it, only other fiction writers care about it, and any way that you can break through. So I don't sneer at writers like Stephen King who have managed to capture the interest of a large audience. I figure if you don't have any audience, you shouldn't be doing this. Tom Wolfe, Tom Wolfe, the journalist, of course, has spouted off very eloquently about the failure of American writers to galvanize a readership the way he thinks Zola and Dreiser and some others did. I think you can force this. I mean, we can't do Zola now exactly. Somehow it just doesn't sing. So you're sort of stuck with being a whatever, postmodern. To the young writers, I would merely say, try to develop actual work habits, and even though you have a busy life, try to reserve an hour, say, or more a day to write. Some very good things have been written on an hour a day. Henry Green, one of my pets, was an industrialist, actually. He was running a company, and he would come home and write for just an hour in an armchair, and the wonderful books were created in this way. So take it seriously, set a quota. Try to think of communicating with some ideal reader somewhere. Try to think of print, of getting into print. Don't be content just to call yourself a writer and then bitch about the crass publishing world that won't run your stuff. We all are, yes, we're still a capitalist country, and writing to some degree is a capitalist enterprise when it's not a total sin to try to make a living and court an audience. Read what excites you would be advice, and even if you don't imitate it, you will learn from it. All those mystery novels I read, I think, did give me some lesson about keeping a plot taut, trying to move forward, or make the reader feel a kind of a tension is being achieved, a string is being pulled tight, and other than that. Don't try to get rich, on the other hand. I don't think it's if you want to get rich, you should go into investment banking or being a certain kind of lawyer. But on the other hand, I would like to think that in a country this large and a language even larger, that there ought to be a living in it for somebody who cares and wants to entertain and instruct a reader. I certainly bought into the American dream as it was voiced by the propagandists of World War II, and I was a great moviegoer, and the movies in the 30s and 40s were where you could see preachments about the American dream, and so I still believe in the American dream. I see it in terms of freedom and a government that trusts its people to exercise freedom. That this is not a government that allows you to give, that allows you to explore and doesn't dampen your own creativity in the broadest sense with a lot of dictums or dogmas or restraints. So insofar as we can remain a free country that allows for the interplay of personal energies, I think this is still a country that is not only working toward a dream, but actually is the dream in action. For all of the knocks that we take in the foreign press, and we've taken a lot lately, I think this is still a country where people want to come. And they want to come, I think, because they feel they are. A French friend of one of my stepsons, boy about 16, just said about the way people dress in America. He said, they are not afraid. And I thought this was a great insight, in France, are the people, well, the French are in a way afraid not to dress in the appropriate costume of a snappy housewife or whatever, and there is a kind of sense of the proper way to dress. And in America, yeah, he censors. So that was his way of saying that, yeah, it's a country that without a government we need be afraid of. It's been, the country's, the land has been good to me. I realize I was lucky, and be born at a lucky time too. So I hesitate to prescribe for today's children, but I would hope they would grow up with something of the same sense of that it's privilege to be an American. It's funny. I think Random House was the publisher, and they weren't sure how I'd react, and so I was shown a manuscript, a photocopy of the manuscript, fairly late in the game. But how could I not be pleased by it? As you say, it's the homage of a younger writer, and what's charming about it is Baker, with his gift for precision, admits he hasn't read an awful lot of me. He has a long list of books of me he has not read, and some of the things that he chose to take as inspirational, in fact, were either not there at all or were not there in quite the way he remembered them. So it was a very good image of how we use other writers. We take what we want, we take what we need, and I'm happy to have been of some use to Nicholson Baker, really. And no, I was very moved and amused by it because it's funny. And he's a writer who, you asked me who I like to read. Well, I do read everything that Nicholson Baker writes because, not only because he flattered me in this way, but because I think he's a very interesting sensibility who really is trying to tackle the whole fiction ball from a different angle. I've never seen anybody who writes quite like him or admits to these obsessions. Talk about the daily and the picayune, small things. His last book, a book of matches, a box of matches, was very much the sort of hyper Updike in the tales. And in a word, I was pleased and amused by the book. Grateful for it.